Alright, so to start, we're going to take a look at the parts that are used to add sides to your Madison chair. We've got a Madison armrest. This is a vintage original. And then we've got pieces of masonite, and I've used oak because I had oak in my shop, so I just put it to use here. You could use something else like, for example, you might want to use pine even, because when you are nailing tack strips in later, you'll find that if this wood is softer, it might go easier on you. I've cut these in such a way that they're a little bit different than how they were made in the factory. In the factory, this piece along the bottom was one continuous piece, and this sat on top. Similarly, at this end, this was one continuous piece out to the front, and that sat on top. But what I've done is I've arranged it so that these blocks will go roughly like this. And when it's all stapled together, there'll be extra resistance here and here for when you are hammering into that. So it gives more, well, I guess a firmer hammering surface would be the way I'd explain it. When it's all put together, it will look like that. And then there's pieces of foam that go on it, and then vinyl. So let's start by making countersinks in the wooden blocks. So these pieces of wood are 13/16 thick, and they make up the width of the armrest side panel. So what I'm doing here is driving the screws that I'm going to be using through the pilot holes that I made. These are number 10 screws. They are 2 inches long, and they require a pilot hole of 3/8. And even then, they're still just a bit snug. So I'm bringing them in like this so that when I'm actually attaching them later on, they'll go through this block, and these heads are going to be what holds it together, and all of the grabbing action is going to go on in these holes here. So I do that just to make sure that I don't stop too soon thinking, hey, it's tight, you know, and I don't get it like that. I had to give it some real twist there just to get it to bite through, and I don't want to confuse what feels like a tight screw now with tightening in this wood. This is a vintage piece of furniture, and I do not want to strip the threads, and I don't want to have to drill a whole bunch of holes in it. I've already got some holes in from where I figured out how I was going to place these blocks, and what I'm essentially doing is I'm making it so that when these are placed, they are going to be, I think it's 13, no, what was it? 11/32 away from this edge here. Now it could be 3/8. I mean, that's really close to 3/8, but the way I was doing some trial and error, and I figured that that's where I would end up. Now, the next step is we're going to have to put on the fabric, and we're going to build this in layers. So we're going to put the fabric that I've sewn together on here, and we're going to run the seam of the fabric roughly through these hole points. There's a couple extra holes from when I was actually using a tool to make a copy of these, and I actually make these for people. If you need any, you can contact me and I'll make a set for you. But it's just these 6 holes here that we'll be using. So part of doing this is that we have to figure out how to line everything up before we do it. So it's one of those cases where you have to measure lots, and then that way hopefully you'll only be cutting once. So this is the pattern here. This piece will form the inside, and it's smaller. The bigger piece will be the outside, and it's got extra room because it's going to have tack strips nailed into it, and it'll be stretched and formed to go on the outside of the chair. However, when we are lining all this up, what we want to do is have this spaced in such a way that when this gets stapled on, it'll line up like that. As you can see, it's pretty close. And we just bring it up to, you leave a little bit of room here because you're going to be folding it over itself and turning it inside out. I'll get my marker here and mark there and there and here here and here, and then using these marks, which you won't be able to see because of the way that Caitlin is filming this right now, we will need to put a mark here and here. So that's how that works. Now I'm going to flip this over and sort of transfer these lines to the other side. They don't have to be perfect, but they have to be fairly close so that you can see what you're doing. As you go. So now we'll have some fun. We have to flip this over and line up all of this with the lines underneath. Alright, so before we lay this out, I went off camera, I added a couple of dots here to show me the spacing of these screws because they're going to be hard to see when we flip this over. And I should have them pretty much right, pretty close. So the idea is that we split the seam and put a screw in right at that mark, and then we're going to put it into the hole underneath. Wrong screwdriver. These are Canadian screws, so they have a square head, and they should line up. The reason I'm doing this is I want to hold the fabric in place before I staple down this seam. If you don't staple the seam down, a couple things could happen. You could have your armrest appear tilted too far to the left or the right, because if you're putting a square block on a lump, if it goes down to one side, then you're putting the whole arm at an angle, and it's not good for your finished result. You don't want to have to go back and fix that after you've done a bunch of stapling. So it's good to check your work as you go and make sure that you take the time to flatten this seam out. So got just 2 more now. I tried at one point to use another technique to flatten this seam, and I was going to use an iron, but not a good idea. And the seam is so short here, it wasn't even going to hold the crease anyway. So I abandoned that idea and came up with this instead. One more. Okay, before I start stapling, I'll just double check everything, because you do not want to pull staples out of hardwood any more than you have to. But the idea is that right now you might be able to see gaps between the wood and the fabric, but when we staple it down, then you won't. That becomes really important when you're stretching the fabric later on. So I get the staple gun and spread the seam. I've learned that you shouldn't press the staple gun's nose down too hard, because if you do, you're likely to pierce the fabric. So I keep it nice and light on top and then put a staple in like that. Okay, and so do one every, I don't know, every ½ inch or 3/4 of an inch or so. And changing it up, I'm running out of hose here because the compressor's out in the garage and I'm doing this downstairs in the basement. I noticed that when I was taking apart one of my vintage Madison chairs, they sometimes do a similar trick, but they use a strip of cardboard. And I thought if I added cardboard here, it would just be too much extra bulk. And I think the doubled up vinyl accomplishes much the same thing. So that was my decision, and if I'm wrong, no one's ever going to see it anyway, because it's going to be buried inside the chair. So I can take out these two now. There we go. Got a continuous sort of a seam going all the way along. Before I lose where my holes are, I've marked these blocks because as much as I tried to drill them straight, they can get a little crooked. So I've marked the front and the part that faces the wood. And I'll use these screws here, I guess. Into the holes, screw that down. You want it fairly snug, and make sure you get some good grip on that armrest underneath. Now if you think that it's failing or you stripped one, there's still room to put an extra screw in there if you needed to. Oops, I managed to break my glass on my meter here, on my gauge, but these blocks are about 2 3/4 long, if that matters. Continuing along here. I go too close on the front here because at the front you're going to be, first of all, there's an overhang of about 1/2 inch to 5/8 on these things, and you want to have room to be able to wrap this around the finished piece. So I tried to just sew it to within range of where I needed to be. Oh, out of staples. Hole there, so go past it. Okay, so front, and there's a pencil arrow that says arm, so that goes that way. Sort of stapled over my holes there, but there we go. Sort of feel it go into place. And now on here there was two holes. Sure that it lines up, because there's one of those holes from when I was grinding the wood. So that should work. Alright, so I'm just putting in the last screws here now. And I realized that when I was looking at something else and playing back what I'd said earlier, these number 10 screws do not use a 3/8 of an inch pilot hole, it's 3/16. And I find sometimes that when I'm working, I might blurt out the wrong thing, and that's unintentional, but at least we caught that. So now, how this is going to work, you see, and the reason I cut that at an angle is that it's all going to slide together like that, which I think is pretty nice, because it starts to feel like a chair when you have this like that, right? So the secret to this is that none of these pieces are actually glued together. They mass produced these in a factory in Mississippi, and they just stapled everything together as they went along. So what I'm going to do then is just quickly put one in on the other side here. So that'll hold it in place for the time being. And I've already got my pilot holes, and I've got them laid out for when it actually screws onto the chair itself. But to make sure those line up, slide a screw in them. Alright, so I've got your foam pieces that are going to go on here. This is 1/4 inch thick foam I picked up from a local upholstery shop. It's white, I've only seen it in yellow before. He tells me this will actually turn yellow with age, which is something I didn't know. But now we can go ahead and, is this the side? This is the outside. So no, we do this last. Ha. Good save there. This is the inside, which we're going to do first. So put on the other piece, line it up. And I noticed when I pull it apart, these chairs before, these guys use staples like they're going out of style. So since it's also holding the chair together, and we're going to be nailing, or not nailing, but we're going to be, we're going to be hammering tack strips into the ends. The more staples that are in the end pieces, and the better off we're going to be. That one didn't go in so well. So we can either hammer it down or we can pull it with a pair of pliers. And put another one in. So hopefully I haven't gone over any of my screw holes. Probably have, but that's okay. Now up here, I'm putting more in the area where those screw blocks were. There's another one that I was a little late on. If you don't put any up in here, the arm is going to lose its rigidity, and you will not have the results you are looking for. Also need some up here because when you're stretching the vinyl, the surface of the foam tends to want to grab this, and you could end up with a wrinkle. And if you don't notice the wrinkle before you finish everything, then it's not going to look very nice. I'm going to put extra staples in here because I want to be able to hammer those tack strips in without having to worry about it all shifting. Now before we do any wrapping of anything around the edge, you want to make sure that you trim. Oh, there's an example of a staple that missed its target because of me having a piece of foam that was too big. So what you want to do is make sure that this is not hanging over the edge, because if it is, it will create some extra wrinkles or bumps in the finished product. Now admittedly on this side that I'm doing right now, you will never see it because this is the inside bottom of the chair, but where you will see it is on the ends. So well, there's some more Mike going crazy with the staple gun. We'll have to come back and revisit that. Trimming these edges. Okay, so I fixed my mistakes with the stapler. Now we just want to get this initially set up here. So I'm going to pull this reasonably tight. And put in a couple staples to keep everything where it needs to be. How's it looking over there? Looks like it's okay. That's enough for now. So we have that. It's parallel. It didn't twist one way or the other, and it's providing some padding on the inside of the chair. And ultimately, when we go to skin it, we'll trim that, and it'll be like this. Now, just like a cooking show where you're making pies, but you only have a limited amount of time, I've got the other side already ready to go. So now I've got two sides for our Madison chair. So that's where we are at the moment. All right, so I am not a professional upholsterer. I'm actually a financial planner. So, but I'm also determined to learn new things. So I've sort of taught myself this stuff, and you know what? I don't want to offend any actual upholstery people out there, but this is how I do a corner. It could be the wrong way, but what I want to do is make sure that in there it ends where the wood is here, and there's extra material. And what I do is I try to fold it over, but then it gets bunched up, right? There's so much of it there. So I cut away some of the excess underneath. Now I don't know if that's a proper technique or not, but I think that you got to do something to get that bulk out of there, because it's going to be thick enough when you get the nail strip in later on. So you can go something like that, still roll the edge over, and then I want to keep the other one over top because that's the one that the nail strip is going to go into. And then hopefully, if I can get my fingers to work right, I can hold that in place. Now it's still going to be a little bit puffy, but the nail strip is going to go over top and put more pieces, not more pieces, it's going to put more material over it, so you shouldn't be able to see that as readily. And here, it's the same idea. I go like that. Again, I don't know if that's right, but there is one more chance to get it right because the other piece will fold over it. Okay, so now I've got to trim off the excess here. And I'm just got to do this corner much the same way as we did the one in the front. Bunch of extra there. fold that over, bring it in close to that edge. Here, I guess. Yeah. So that should do it for the insides. And so now the next step is to attach the whole thing to the actual rest of the chair. Okay, so now we're going to attach one of the sides. I've already drilled pilot holes, and I'll reproduce that when I do the other side. But for now, I'm just going to put these screws in. These screws are the what do you call them? Phillips screws. I salvaged them from the frame of the Madison couch, so I thought I'd use these here. Already got the holes from when I've done a attachment of this before. I'll start with the one in the corner, and it's going to pierce the vinyl and foam on the other side, and then I'm going to line it up with that hole, and hopefully it'll all screw together. Yes. Okay, and then same thing here. Can feel it coming through with my finger. I'm going to do the same with this one while I can. Now, these chairs are made out of, the chair that I'm screwing into on the bottom is just a piece of laminated board over top of some plywood. So if you overdo it on the screws, you're going to strip them. So my advice is just do them till they're snug. On the side, it's made of some sort of hardwood, so there's a bit more strength to the wood fiber that you're screwing into. Okay, and some foam. Should we go right up into the corner with it? Right up under that edge. It tends to grab on the masonite, which for some reason they built it with the rough side out. So I'm just following what I've seen in other samples that I've seen on the internet. I want to make sure that I get adequate staples in this area and in this area, and along the edge. Try not to hit the screws. Next screw is there, so we'll skip it. Here. Oh, am I out of staples again? Apparently. Okay, so if you see from the top here, it's starting to look like the actual chair. Okay, so if we look at the back of this thing, you can see that there's a seam on the actual Madison chair itself. That's the back piece of upholstery, and you can see where the piece of wood for the wood rest or the armrest has to be. They have to line up. Okay, now something that I discovered in having purchased several of these Madison factory chairs over the years is that the angle of the chair, the actual tilt right in here, can vary between 101 and 103 degrees. And similarly, over time, these things being antique furnitures that have been sat on by people all over the place in waiting rooms and what have you, the screws can get loose, and or some of the plywood structure can become broken or bent. Now in this case nothing's broken, but this side of the chair is actually out a couple degrees, and so this is the time to straighten it. In doing so, what I did was I carefully pulled out the staples and went in here and found the, sorry, not much of a cameraman or an upholsterer, but in there's the original screws that hold this arm in place, and so you can loosen those off. There's actually 4 of them. You loosen those off, and then it'll give you a little bit of wiggle room, because again, nothing is glued together in these. Okay, so I've carefully tried to line this up, and it gets difficult because you got multiple layers of vinyl. I mean, here on the original chair, there's a metal strip right in there, then there's a folded over piece of vinyl, and there's all these other folded over pieces of vinyl. I'm trying to line up wood with wood, because by the time we wrap this around with the extra strips, it's going to be flush with this surface. But if you look up here, you can see it starts to become a bigger distance from here to here than it is down there, and that's because on this side of the chair it's been sort of pushed back a little bit. So what I'm doing is I'm using this point as my pivot point, and I'm going to drill a pilot hole in there and put a screw in, and then I'm going to swing this piece up to there and drill those 2 holes, and then because of the extra leverage that gives me, I'm going to come back over to here and line up this one. And that should pull it all together, and then I'll tighten these screws down in the bottom here, and we'll be ready to do the tack strips. So here we go. Here we go. And I'm reaching behind the cameraman here. Camera lady. Change my hands because I'm not left-handed. There we go. That tightens that up. Good. Now, if my plan works, we'll slide this to there so it looks more level. And again, that piece of wood needs to line up with that little seam there, and I'm sure the lighting's not great right now, but there's a little seam there that'll needs to line up, and this should be a nice parallel sort of a gap between the 2 pieces. When you screw that down, it'll tighten up. So put the next pilot holes in. You only get one chance, so make sure that I do it right. I do not want to screw up. In fact, before I do, I'm just going to make sure I get an idea down here. Yeah, it looks about consistent. Okay. squishing everything together. And it should be good. Okay, good. So now, on this side, if this works, yeah, it'll work. We just gotta pull that in like that. So, well, gonna need my camera person to put down that camera and give me a hand. Alright, so the lighting's not great, but what I'm going to try and show here is how I've figured out the easiest way to nail in the nailing tack strips. So what I did here was I put the fabric out. I don't have my camera assistant today, so I'm doing this by one hand. And I found the line here where the wooden armrest actually joins. And you see there's a line here by my thumb that I've drawn that corresponds to that edge there in the vinyl's unstretched state. So everything to this side of that line is going to be waste, because we're going to put the nailing strip in so that its inner edge will be along this line to the right of it, and then it's going to fold over on itself, and it'll come back to here, and with some heat applied we're going to stretch that over and press it in. And I've learned that pressing in the nail strips is actually a better way to do it until you're sure that the nail heads are actually in the wood. So I'm going to set that up and then we'll show you the next bit. Okay, so there's the nail strip tucked in along that line. One thing to note is up here on this end, you want to make sure that you have this edge that will become the edge we see here. You want to make sure that's folded over and that you've taken time to figure that out ahead of time. I did some measuring here so that I knew where to put the end of the nail strip and still have room. You don't want it to hit the wooden part of your armrest. Okay, so I'll fold this over now. Okay, so I got my camera person back, so this will be a little easier. So we've got the tack strip here. Got a piece of tape just to help hold that back. I've got this wrapped around so that when the whole thing flips over, it's ready to go. Down here, I've laid out first where the edge of the wood is with one piece of tape, and then the second piece of tape shows me where the nails should go no further than, so that this edge will then end up aligned with the first piece of tape. And just before I hammer it all the way down, I'll just pull it out. Okay, now I have another assistant that's going to run the hairdryer to heat this up, and then we'll get this going. So can probably get about a ½ an inch of extra stretch out of the fabric this way. So if we could start the hairdryer, please. They probably need to be closer. Okay, and then move it closer to you then. Move it a bit more to you. There we go, we're running out of front here. A bit more up here. And a bit more at the other end, down here. Alright, a little more at the top. About there. flip it over. All the nails are in the right spot now. You just have to twist this strip so that it goes in. And without the nails bending, because they want to. Yeah, that's probably enough heat for now. Ha. Tuck that in later with a putty knife or something. So there, and you can see there's some waves here, but again, more heat and a little bit of tension and it'll all go away, right? Got the next one ready for the front, and the tape's laid out, and you can see the nails are going to go there. So now we're just going to apply some heat and get this thing folded over. Fingers are burning. So the nails are going in straight. Things are tight, like they should be. Pull the tape off. Nice. And then ultimately you're just going to fold that down, fold that like this, and staple it. But I'm going to take the time to take this off, this finish from the original chair, and put this vinyl underneath it and put that back on, just so it gives it a sort of a factory look to it. So now, after owning this Madison chair for, I don't know, six years, going on 7, we finally call this done.